The first time I stepped inside that abandoned orphanage, I felt like the walls were whispering my name. I know that sounds dramatic. Maybe even a little foolish. But I swear to you, the moment my foot crossed that threshold, something in my chest tightened, as if an invisible hand reached in and twisted. The air was stale, heavy, thick with dust and secrets time had tried to bury. Outside, the late afternoon sun still touched the broken bricks with gold, but inside, darkness moved like it was alive, curling around every doorway. I shouldn't have been there. I had promised myself I wouldn't go back. Yet there I was, standing inside a building the town preferred to forget. My hands were shaking, not the kind you notice immediately, but the subtle tremor that starts in your fingertips and travels up to your breath. Even now, I can remember the faint smell of damp wood and old paper. It hit me like a memory I shouldn't have recognized. But I did. My body recognized it long before my mind did. It was that smell, like dusted chalk and cold stone, that pushed me toward the hallway on the left. The one the locals said was the nursery wing. I don't know what I expected to find, but certainly not the truth that would end up shattering everything I believed about my family. All I remember from that moment is one thought repeating in my head like a drum. Why does this place feel familiar? And the thing about familiarity is, it always leads to questions. Questions lead to secrets. And secrets? They lead to heartbreak. Mine began with a single locked drawer, and the name carved inside it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Back to before the whispers, before the discoveries, before everything fell apart. Back to when my life still felt whole. Normal life/setup. For most of my life, I never imagined my family was anything but ordinary. Ordinary in that quiet, small-town way, where everyone knows your father's favorite breakfast order and your mother's preferred flower vase pattern. I grew up in a simple brick house on the edge of town, where the neighbors waved from their porches and the mailman always stopped to chat about the weather. My parents, especially my father, carried routines like they were holy rituals. Every morning, he'd hum the same low tune as he fried eggs. My mother would sit at the kitchen table, peeling oranges with the same slow precision she used for everything in life. And I'd sip my tea, listening to them talk about the day as if the world outside our windows couldn't possibly hurt us. My father, Samuel, was a quiet man, steady, thoughtful, the kind of person who didn't waste words. He had this gentle way of looking at people, as if he was searching their faces for something they didn't know they were saying. But he rarely spoke about his past. My mother once told me he didn't grow up with much, but she said it the way you'd mention a light rainstorm, casually, without weight. I never questioned it. Why would I? Parents are allowed to have pieces of themselves they don't share. Still, there were moments. Small ones. Moments that slipped through the cracks. Like the time I found him sitting alone in the backyard, staring into the distance with a half-broken expression. Or the way he sometimes flinched when he heard children crying on TV. Or how he avoided a particular part of town, always taking the longer route home, even if it meant an extra 10 minutes. I didn't understand any of it back then. To me, he was just my father. The man who fixed my bike when I was 10. Who taught me how to tie fishing knots. Who walked me to my first job interview because I was too nervous to breathe right, as he joked. But life has a way of revealing truths when you least expect them. My shift into adulthood didn't come with any dramatic fanfare. I graduated, started working at a small publishing office, and moved into my own apartment a few blocks away. My routine was simple: work, dinner with my parents twice a week, and long weekend calls with my sister, Hannah, who lived 3 states away. My parents loved our visits. My mother would make her famous lentil stew, the one she said tasted better when the family sits close. My father would sit across from me, quietly eating, occasionally asking about my workload or if my car was making that odd noise again. Looking back, I realize something now. Those dinners were the last time life felt uncomplicated. Because everything began to shift the year the town announced it would demolish the old St. Edith's orphanage, the one abandoned for decades, sitting at the edge of the woods like a scar the town didn't want to acknowledge. People said it was haunted. Others said it was cursed. Most simply said it held too many sad memories. But my father reacted differently. The moment he heard the news, his hand froze mid-air, the fork suspended, his breath caught in his chest. It was the smallest pause, yet unmistakable. His eyes flicked toward my mother, a quick, uneasy glance, before he lowered his fork carefully, almost nervously. "What did they say?" he asked. His voice was too calm. Too controlled. "They're taking it down next month," I replied casually. "It's not safe anymore." My father didn't respond. He just stared at his plate, as if trying to decide whether to speak or stay silent. Finally, he rose from the table, murmuring something about needing air, and stepped outside. I remember turning to my mother, confused. She didn't look surprised, just tired. "Mom?" I asked. She folded her napkin quietly, smoothing it flat with trembling fingers. "It's nothing you need to worry about," she said. But I wasn't convinced. Not even close. Because in 28 years, I had never, not once, seen my father react like that. And suddenly, a place I had never cared about became the center of everything. The abandoned orphanage. The building my father refused to speak about. The building I would soon enter with shaking hands. Everything began with that night. Everything began with his silence. In the days after that dinner, my father's reaction stayed with me like a shadow that refused to fade. It wasn't just the look in his eyes, it was the silence that followed. Silence has a way of telling the truth long before words do. I kept replaying the moment over and over. The fork paused mid-air. The glance at my mother. The way he walked outside like the air had become too heavy to breathe. But every time I thought about asking, something stopped me. Maybe it was respect. Maybe fear. Maybe I wasn't ready for an answer. Back then, it felt easier to pretend nothing was wrong. A week passed. Work kept me busy, editing manuscripts, managing deadlines, drinking too much lukewarm coffee from the office pot that everyone complained about but still drank. Life floated on, almost normally. But my father wasn't normal. Not anymore. He stopped humming during breakfast. He stopped coming to the weekly farmer's market he loved. He barely smiled, even at my mother, who tried so hard to fill the silence with gentle jokes and forced optimism. One night, after dinner at my parents' house, I noticed him sitting alone on the porch, his shoulders slumped forward as if carrying a weight I couldn't see. His hands were clasped together, knuckles pale, like he was praying, or bracing for something painful. "Dad?" I said softly. He startled. Actually startled. My father was the kind of man who never flinched, never panicked, never reacted without thinking. But that night, he looked like I'd caught him in the middle of a confession he couldn't give. "Oh, hey, sweetheart," he said. His voice was too forced. Too light. I walked over and sat beside him. The wooden step creaked beneath my weight. The air smelled faintly of rain and the jasmine plant my mother tended like a child. "You've been quiet lately," I said. He stared straight ahead. "Just thinking." "About what?" For a moment, I thought he might tell me. His lips parted slightly, a breath caught in the middle, wanting to become a word. But then he shook his head. "Nothing important," he said. And just like that, the door closed again. I should have pushed harder. But I didn't. I wish I had. 2 weeks after that, the town posted flyers announcing that St. Edith's Orphanage would be demolished on a Saturday morning, open to the public for viewing one last time. People were curious, of course. Old places hold old stories, and small towns love stories more than anything. I wasn't planning to go. But the night before the demolition, my mother called me. "Could you come by?" she asked. Her voice sounded thin. Not weak, but stretched, like a rope tied too tight. When I arrived, I found her sitting alone at the dining table, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. She never did that unless something was bothering her deeply. Mom? What's wrong? She hesitated, then carefully slid a folded newspaper across the table toward me. The headline read, St. Edith's Orphanage, Final Public Walkthrough Before Demolition. A picture beneath showed the crumbling building, its windows black and hollow like empty eyes. I think you should go tomorrow, she said quietly. Why? I frowned. She looked toward the backyard, where my father was pacing, something he never did. His movements were restless, uneven, like a man haunted. Because your father won't, she whispered. And, someone should. Mom, what are you talking about? I asked, my chest tightening. She brought her fingers to her temples, massaging gently. There are things from before you were born, that your father never learned how to speak about. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. What things? She shook her head. It isn't my place to tell you. Then whose place is it? She looked at me with eyes that were tired and pleading. His. Silence settled between us, thick and uncomfortable. I stared at the photograph again, the broken windows, the sagging roof, the overgrown grass reaching up like hands. The place looked abandoned, yes, but not empty. Mom, I asked slowly, what does Dad have to do with that orphanage? She exhaled a breath she seemed to have been holding for years. All I can say is, it's part of him. A part he never healed. She paused. Please. Go. Her voice wasn't commanding. It was aching. So I nodded. Okay. I'll go. The moment I said it, something shifted in her expression, relief, maybe. Or fear. Or both. The first suspicion. The next morning, I drove toward the orphanage with a strange heaviness in my chest. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that felt like it was following you. The road curved through the woods, and with each turn, my heart thumped a little harder. I parked at the edge of the property. Only a handful of people stood around, mostly older locals pointing at the building and murmuring about how time had finally caught up to it. The structure looked worse up close. Half the roof had collapsed. Ivy crawled up the brick walls like veins. The old iron gate creaked in the wind. A woman in her 70s stood beside me, shaking her head. Shame, isn't it? She said. So many memories in there. Did you work here? I asked. Oh no, she chuckled sadly. But I visited often. Church programs, charity drives, that sort of thing. She paused, squinting at the building as if searching for something long lost. Used to be a good place, she continued. Hard years, though. Too many children, not enough hands. I swallowed. Did you know the children well? Some of them, she said. One boy especially, quiet kid. Bright eyes. Watched the world like he didn't know whether to trust it. My heart tugged, suddenly, sharply. What was his name? She thought for a moment, tapping a finger against her chin. Sammy, she said finally. Little Sammy. My breath stilled. Sammy. My father's name. But no, it couldn't be. It couldn't. Before I could ask anything else, the demolition crew announced the building was open for one final walkthrough. People trickled inside. I followed. The air hit me like a weight, cold, musty, thick with forgotten years. Floorboards creaked beneath my steps. Every hallway felt too familiar. Too familiar. That was when the first real tremor of suspicion rippled through me. Not fear. Not confusion. Something deeper. Recognition. But recognition from where? And why? My feet carried me toward the left hallway, the same one the locals called the nursery wing. I didn't choose it. It felt like it chose me. And as I walked, the walls seemed to whisper again. As if waiting for me. As if they had a story to tell. The deeper I walked into that hallway, the more the air changed. It wasn't just the smell, though the scent of old plaster and mildew grew stronger. It was something else. Something almost emotional. As if the building itself remembered things no one had spoken aloud in decades. The floorboards groaned beneath me, each step stirring up specks of dust that floated in the dim light. My fingers grazed the peeling paint on the walls, pale yellow, faded like an old photograph. I imagined children's voices echoing through these halls once. Laughter. Maybe crying. Maybe both. I didn't know why my chest felt tight. I didn't know why I felt like something in me recognized this place. Then I reached a small room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. Faded letters were painted above the frame, barely readable now. N-U-R-S-E-R-Y. I pushed the door gently. The hinges whined, long and sorrowful. Inside, the room was small, maybe once filled with cribs or tiny beds. Dust coated everything. A single broken rocking chair sat in the corner, its wooden runners still and brittle. I stepped in slowly, feeling that same strange tug in my chest. Like I'd been here before. Like a place you dream about and then stumble into in real life. I told myself it was just nerves. Just curiosity. But then I saw the drawer. A small built-in cabinet beneath the boarded-up window, covered in dust and cobwebs. 3 drawers, all shut except the second one, which was slightly open, as if someone had left in a hurry long ago. A soft draft brushed my arm. My pulse quickened. I knelt down and pulled the drawer open. It resisted at first, like it hadn't been touched in decades. Then, with a groan, it slid forward. Inside, there were only 2 things. A small wooden toy, a carved bird with one missing wing. And a name. Carved faintly into the bottom of the drawer, in uneven letters, the kind a child might scratch with a nail or a stone. Sam. My breath caught. Not because the name was rare, Samuel, it could have been anyone. But the handwriting. The way the letters tilted. The hesitation marks around the curves. The uneven depth of the carving. It reminded me of something. When I was 11, my father carved my initials into a wooden bookmark he made me for school. I still remembered watching him. The careful, deep strokes. The pauses between each letter. The unevenness of the M where his hand shook slightly. I stared at the carving in the drawer. The A had the same slight curve. The M had the same trembling line. My fingers trembled as I brushed the letters. Could it really be him? Finding something interesting? I froze. A man stood in the doorway, maybe in his late 60s. I'd seen him around town. He was one of the men who volunteered at the Historical Society. Always carried a notebook. Always looked like he knew more than he said. Oh, I exhaled, standing quickly. I was just looking. His eyes scanned the room slowly, landing on the drawer behind me. Huh, he murmured. That drawer again. Again? I repeated. You've seen it before? He nodded. Used to be a child here who scratched that in. Lonely boy. Never spoke much. The staff said he barely talked at all. My heart hammered. What happened to him? I asked. The man shrugged. Adopted, I think. Early 70s. Records are spotty. I swallowed hard. What was his full name? He thought for a moment. Too long, actually, like he was digging into memories he'd rather not revisit. I only remember Sammy. Quiet kid. Big eyes. Smart. Always holding that little wooden bird. He gestured to the toy still inside the drawer. My stomach dropped. The wooden bird. The one with the broken wing. When I was a child, my father had a small carved bird on his dresser, missing a wing. He told me he bought it cheap at a market when he was young. I never thought twice. But the shape. The size. The carving pattern. It was identical. I felt dizzy. Are you all right? The man asked. Why yes, I murmured, even though my voice cracked. Just, overwhelmed. He nodded sympathetically. Places like this tend to bring old stories back up. He left the room quietly. But I stayed, rooted to the floor, staring at the toy, then at the carved name. The walls felt closer now, like they had been waiting for this moment. I reached for the wooden bird. As soon as my fingers touched it, something broke inside me. Not a sound, not a memory, but something emotional, something buried and tender. I tucked the toy into my coat pocket. Not out of theft, but because it felt like it belonged to me. To my story. To my family. I took one last look at the drawer. The name Sam. A child's desperate mark. My father's mark, I felt it in my bones. When I walked out of the nursery room, the hallway seemed different. Heavier. More real. I followed the narrow path back toward the entrance, but halfway there, I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. A bulletin board, old, warped, covered in yellowed papers and curled corners. Photographs pinned in uneven rows. Staff pictures. Event flyers. Holiday cards drawn by children. And near the bottom, a small, faded group photo. I knelt down. There were 5 children in the picture, maybe 6 or 7 years old. All dressed in oversized hand-me-down sweaters. 4 of them looked at the camera with playful smiles. But the 5th child. The 5th stood slightly apart. Quiet. Thin. With big, solemn eyes. Eyes I knew. Eyes I had seen in the mirror my whole life. Because they were my father's. My vision blurred. I traced the face with a trembling finger. My father. A small boy in an orphanage he never told us about. A life he buried. A past he ran from. And the moment I saw that face, the moment I knew without any doubt that it was him. I also knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a past he hid. It was a past someone forced him to hide. And I was going to find out why. I left the orphanage with my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was echoing in my ears. The sky outside was darker now, heavy with clouds that looked like they were ready to break open. The air smelled of rain and rusted metal, the kind that lingers around old fences and forgotten places. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the orphanage through the windshield. The building looked different now. No longer a haunting relic of the town's past, but a mirror pointing directly at my father's hidden childhood. He had lived there. He had carved that name. He had held that wooden bird. And yet, he never told us. Why? What could be so painful that he'd rather erase it entirely? 1,000 questions welled up in my mind, but one thought rose above all the others. I needed to confront him. Not out of anger. Not even out of betrayal. But because I suddenly realized I didn't truly know the man who raised me. I started the car and drove straight to my parents' house. When I arrived, the house was dim except for the warm glow from the kitchen light. My mother was at the counter chopping vegetables, her movements slow and careful, as if her mind was somewhere far away. She looked up when she heard the door. "You're back early," she said softly. "Where's Dad?" She hesitated. "In the den." I nodded and walked down the hallway, heart thudding against my ribs. The wooden floor creaked beneath me, that familiar sound of home suddenly felt foreign. When I reached the den doorway, I saw him sitting in his old armchair, his head resting on one hand. The TV was on, but the volume was low, almost muted. He wasn't watching it, just staring through it. I cleared my throat gently. "Dad?" His head lifted slowly. The moment he saw me, something flickered across his expression, surprise, then worry, then resignation. As if he already knew why I'd come. I stepped inside, holding the wooden bird in my palm. His eyes locked on it instantly. And for a moment, he stopped breathing. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, barely a breath, barely a sound. "St. Edith's," I said. "I went to the orphanage today." He closed his eyes. Not in annoyance. Not in frustration. In pain. Deep, buried, decades-old pain. I walked closer. Dad, why didn't you tell us you grew up there? He rubbed his jaw with a trembling hand, a gesture I'd seen him do only when he was deeply unsettled. Because I left that place behind, he said quietly. Or I thought I did. But why hide it? I sat across from him. Why carry that alone your entire life? His shoulders slumped, as if something he'd been holding up finally collapsed. He didn't answer immediately. And when he did, his voice was not the steady, quiet tone he always used, but something fragile. I was ashamed. The words hit me harder than I expected. Ashamed? I whispered. Why? He looked at the wooden bird again, as if it was something more than a toy. Something sacred. When I was a child, he began slowly, the orphanage wasn't a kind place. Not back then. They didn't hurt us physically, but they had ways of reminding us that we were unwanted. That we didn't belong to anyone. I felt my throat tighten. I used to carve things, names, little birds, whatever scraps of wood I could find, just to feel like I had control over something. He gave a weak smile. I carved Sam because I wanted the universe to know I existed. That I wasn't invisible. I swallowed hard, lowering my gaze to the toy in my hand. But Dad, why didn't you tell us? Me? Hannah? He inhaled deeply, as if preparing himself for a truth he'd kept buried for decades. Your grandmother, he said finally. She didn't want anyone to know. I froze. My grandmother? But, she died before I was born. What would she? She wasn't my biological mother, he said. The room fell into silence. My heartbeat rang in my ears. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. It felt like the air in the room thickened. She and your grandfather adopted me when I was 9, he continued. But she had one condition, that I never tell anyone I was adopted. She truly believed that people saw orphans as damaged, less worthy. She didn't want society to judge me. Or judge her. His voice cracked. She made me promise. And I was just a boy. I wanted so badly to be loved. So I agreed. Tears pricked at my eyes. But she raised you, I whispered. She loved you. He nodded slowly. In her way, yes. But her love was conditional. It came with silence. With secrecy. I grew up feeling like if people knew where I came from, they'd look at me differently. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. And when I met your mother, I was terrified she'd walk away if she found out. My mother had entered quietly and stood behind me now, her hands clasped tightly. I didn't walk away, she said softly. My father lifted his head, eyes glistening. No, he whispered. You didn't. But the fear, it stayed. He looked at me again, really looked. And then you were born, he said, voice thickening. And I wanted you to have a clean life. A life without the shame I carried. I didn't want you to think your father came from nothing. My chest tightened painfully. Dad, I said, my voice barely holding steady. You didn't come from nothing. You came from survival. His shoulders trembled. I reached out and took his hand. The same hand that carved Sam into a wooden drawer. The same hand that held me when I took my first steps. The same hand that had carried decades of silence. You should have told me, I whispered. I'm not ashamed of you. Tears filled his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father cry. Not softly. Not quietly. But deeply. Decades of hidden grief finally breaking open. My mother moved beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He leaned into her touch, exhausted. It was a moment full of tenderness and heartbreak. But it was also the moment I realized something else. Something he hadn't told us yet. Because there was a second question still burning inside me. If he was adopted at 9, then what happened before that? And why did he look terrified when I mentioned the past? There was more. I could feel it. Something darker. Something he still wasn't telling us. Something he still feared. And I was about to uncover it, whether he was ready or not. When I walked back into my apartment, the place felt colder than usual. Not literally, just heavier. Like someone had left an old memory sitting on the couch, waiting for me to notice it. I set the shoebox on the table. My hands were still shaking. For a few minutes, I just stared at it. A name. A baby bracelet. And a man I thought I knew. My grandfather. Or, whoever he really was. I took a deep breath and opened the box again. Inside, there was something I hadn't noticed earlier, because it had been tucked under a folded piece of cloth. A letter. Yellowed. Crumpled. And sealed in an envelope that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. My heart thumped so loud I could hear it. The envelope had one thing written on the front. For Daniel, when you are old enough to understand. Daniel. Not my name. Not my father's name either. But I remembered something, faintly, from childhood. A moment I never thought twice about. I must have been 7 or 8 when I heard my grandfather call my dad Danny once. Just once. And my dad had turned around so sharply, so angrily, that I thought he was going to explode. Don't ever use that name again, he'd snapped. And my grandfather. He'd apologized. My grandfather never apologized. I didn't know what that meant back then. But I sure knew now. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in my grandfather's handwriting. Messy, jagged strokes, like the pen had been shaking in his hand. I started reading. My real name is not Harold. I froze. The room felt still. The kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. I kept reading. When I was 21, I changed my identity to protect someone I loved more than my own life. My hands tightened around the paper. This wasn't some dramatic story he had invented in his old age. This was real. This was confession-level real. I read the next line. Your name was Daniel before I erased it. I blinked. My chest tightened. Before he erased it? I read faster now, like the words were pulling me into them. He wrote about a different town. A different life. A mistake that wasn't entirely his fault, but one that changed everything. He had a brother. Younger. Reckless. Involved with the wrong people. One night, something terrible happened. A fight. A weapon pulled. A man injured, badly. His brother panicked. Ran. Begged for help. And my grandfather, before he was my grandfather, had made a split-second choice. He took the blame. Not out of guilt. Out of love. But things spiraled out of control. His brother disappeared. The police started closing in. And he knew, if he stayed, he'd go to prison for something he didn't do. So he ran. He changed everything, his name, his address, his life. He became Harold. A new man. A clean slate. And from that moment, he promised himself one thing. I will build a life so normal, so quiet, that no one will ever ask who I used to be. And he did. He married. He worked. He raised a family. But the past doesn't just disappear. And it turns out, he didn't just change his name. He changed my dad's name too. Daniel became someone else. A new identity for a child who didn't even know he had another one. Because my grandfather was afraid that the people searching for him might come for anyone connected to him. My dad grew up never knowing why. Never knowing who he used to be. Never knowing that a single decision, made before he was old enough to speak, had rewritten his entire identity. And then I reached the line that made me sit down. If you are reading this, it means I failed to tell the truth while I still had time. My throat tightened. Failed. This whole thing. It had eaten him alive. He hadn't been hiding from us. He had been protecting us. And suddenly, I understood why he had kept that shoebox. It wasn't guilt. It was grief. Grief over a life he lost. A name he buried. A brother he never found. A child whose identity he had rewritten out of fear. There was one more paragraph. One that made my eyes sting. If you want to hate me, I will understand. But if you choose to forgive me, I hope you will find the brother I couldn't. His name was Michael. Tell him I never stopped looking. Michael. My great-uncle. A man I didn't know existed. A man still out there somewhere. Alive? Dead? Lost? Running? I didn't know. I read the letter again. And again. Trying to breathe. Trying to understand the weight of everything I had just learned. Identity. Family. Secrets. Fear. Love. It was all tangled together. And then, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Just one sentence. I heard you're looking into Harold's past. We need to talk. My blood turned cold. How did they know? Who were they? And how long had they been waiting for this moment? I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because after everything I had just learned, someone else knew the truth. And they had been watching. The text sat on my phone like a live coal. I stared at it, my fingers hovering over the screen. Who were they? And what did they want from me? The logical part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend I hadn't seen it, to tuck the letter and the wooden bird back in the shoebox and live in the quiet life I had before. But my gut screamed differently. There's a strange courage that comes when you realize the truth is already bigger than you. I was already in it. There was no turning back. I called the number. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. The line rang once, twice, then a deep, calm voice answered. Hello. I think we need to meet. The voice didn't belong to a stranger in the usual sense. It was familiar, but formal. Careful. Like someone used to carrying secrets too heavy for their own shoulders. I'm listening, I said cautiously. I'm Michael, the voice said. The name hit me harder than I could have imagined. The brother my grandfather mentioned. The one who disappeared. Alive. Somewhere. And speaking to me now, decades later, over the same life my father had tried to bury. I've been following the story, Michael continued. Not your story exactly. My father's. Your grandfather. I know you've found things that were never meant to be found. And you're not the only one who's searching for answers. I swallowed, heart hammering. Why now? After all these years? Because your father, and your grandfather, they carried this alone too long. It's time someone tells the truth. All of it. And that someone is you now. I felt the weight of his words sink into me. Truth. It had a way of making everything around you suddenly sharp, uncomfortable, irreversible. We agreed to meet the next day at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. When I arrived, Michael was already there. He was taller than I expected, with eyes that carried grief and history. His face was lined with years, but his gaze was clear, sharp, unflinching. We didn't start with pleasantries. Michael pulled a folder from his bag, worn and thick with documents, photographs, and letters. This is everything, he said. Everything your grandfather tried to bury. The adoption papers, my father's old files, the orphanage records. Even the letters your grandfather wrote but never sent to me. I flipped through the papers. Photos of children in the orphanage. A young boy with big, solemn eyes. Then, my father's name. Daniel. Then, my grandfather's old handwriting, full of apologies, regrets, confessions I couldn't yet fully process. This is all real? I asked. Michael nodded. Everything. And the town doesn't know. But they will. When you decide to share it. I froze. Because there it was, the moment I'd been bracing for without realizing it. The truth would no longer just belong to us. It would spill into the town, into our community, into every life touched by the orphanage. I thought about my father. My mother. My sister. What would it mean to let the public in? I need time, I said quietly. I can't just broadcast this. Michael leaned back. You don't have to. But hiding it won't make it disappear. Someone else will find it eventually. And maybe, it's better if the family who carries it tells the story first. His words stung. They were right. Over the next few days, I slowly pieced together the full picture. My grandfather had changed his identity to protect a life that wasn't his own. My father had been adopted into that life, never knowing who he really was. Michael had lived decades searching, waiting, hoping for the family to acknowledge him. And now, all 3 generations of our family history were intertwined with a place everyone else in town had long forgotten, St. Edith's Orphanage. I finally realized the weight of it. Not just for us, but for the town. When I told my parents, my mother cried softly. My father sat quietly, looking at the wooden bird, the letter, and finally at me. I never wanted this to reach you this way, he said. I thought I was protecting you. But maybe, the past protects us less than we think. I nodded. Because I understood now, sometimes, the truth has a life of its own. And when it decides to move, nothing can stop it. We decided together to bring the story forward. Not as scandal. Not as gossip. But as history. The town council allowed a small exhibit about the orphanage before demolition. Photographs, letters, artifacts from the children who had lived there. And there, tucked in a display case, were the carved wooden bird, the letters, and my grandfather's old files. People came. Locals, historians, even children from the nearby schools. Some wept quietly. Some whispered about how little they had known. Some thanked us for sharing the story, for letting the memories live again. When my father saw the reactions, he finally smiled, faint, but real. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of release. Of healing. And Michael, he finally met my father, face to face, decades later. It was awkward at first. Words stumbled. Then came apologies, embraces, and tears. Because some truths, even if delayed, demand to be acknowledged. I stood back and watched. Feeling the weight lift, a little, from all of us. The truth had consequences, yes. But it also brought something beautiful, closure, understanding, and a chance to rebuild broken connections. No one left the exhibit untouched. Even those who didn't know our family personally felt it. Because truth, when finally told, touches everyone. And for the first time in decades, the orphanage, broken, abandoned, long forgotten, felt like it had a purpose again. It had told our story. And in doing so, it freed us from silence. After the exhibit, life settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. But ordinary in the sense that the air after a storm feels, when the rain has stopped but the streets are still damp, the earth smells fresh, and sunlight touches everything differently. For weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about the orphanage, the letters, the wooden bird, and the story that had bound our family to a place we never knew. I visited my father more often. Not just for meals, not just for routine, but to sit and talk. To hear the unspoken. To fill the quiet spaces that had stretched for decades. One afternoon, we sat on the porch together, the same porch I had sat on as a child. The jasmine bush my mother tended bloomed faintly, filling the air with that delicate, lingering scent. You know, my father said, I always thought telling you would hurt you more than it did me. I was wrong. I nodded, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. It hurt, yes, but only because I didn't understand. Now I do. He looked at me, his hand brushing over the old wooden railing, worn smooth over the years. The past doesn't define us. It just shapes the way we move forward. And he was right. We reached out to Michael again. Not for answers, not for closure, not for obligation, but for connection. Over coffee and quiet afternoons, we rebuilt a relationship that had been interrupted decades ago. He shared stories about his life after the disappearance, the years of searching, the loneliness. My father listened. I listened. And slowly, forgiveness settled in, not just for the people who had made mistakes, but for ourselves. I also reconnected with the community. The exhibit had done more than reveal our family history, it opened a dialogue about the orphanage itself. Volunteers came forward to share memories, old photographs were donated, and local historians documented the stories of children whose voices had long been forgotten. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't seamless. Healing rarely is. But it was real. For the first time, I understood the value of confronting history rather than hiding from it. I understood that secrecy, even with the best intentions, can create shadows that grow heavier over time. I decided to write about our story, not to shame, not to sensationalize, but to honor the truth. The name Sammy, the wooden bird, the letters, all of it belonged to more than our family. It belonged to the children, to the town, to everyone whose memory had been quietly tucked away. Through the process, I realized that healing is never a straight path. It's a series of small steps, acknowledging the past, sitting with discomfort, telling the truth, allowing grief to exist, and slowly, gently, letting forgiveness take root. My mother found peace too. She spent hours organizing photographs and documents, turning them into memory albums for our family. She laughed more, softly, in ways she hadn't in years. And my father, he finally put away the fear that had haunted him since childhood. He no longer flinched at the mention of his past. He carried it with dignity. Not as shame, but as survival. And courage. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, I held the wooden bird in my hand again. The single missing wing no longer felt broken. It felt like a symbol. The past may be imperfect, but we can still honor it. We can still move forward. I breathed in the jasmine, the warmth of the setting sun on my skin, and I realized something profound. Even though the orphanage had been abandoned, even though decades of silence had clouded our family, the truth had a way of finding its way home. And with it, so did healing. Weeks turned into months. The town finally demolished the orphanage, but this time, with reverence. A small memorial remained where the building once stood, with a plaque honoring the children who had lived there, their names etched into the stone. I visited often. Not out of sorrow. Not out of regret. But to remember what had been, to honor it, and to appreciate what had come after: family, truth, and a quiet strength that comes only when you face the past with open eyes and an open heart. One day, my father walked with me to the memorial. He placed his hand lightly on the stone. "I never wanted you to inherit my silence," he said softly. "But now, you know the truth. And that is stronger than any fear I've ever carried." I squeezed his hand. "I know, Dad. And I'll carry it forward carefully. Honestly. With love." And in that moment, I realized something: the past will always be a part of us. But it doesn't have to control us. We can choose how we move forward. We can choose to tell the story. We can choose to forgive. We can choose to heal. Sitting here now, looking back on everything, I realize something I didn't understand before. Family isn't just the people who raise you. It's the history you inherit. The secrets, the choices, the mistakes, and the courage that ripple across generations. Sometimes, the truth is buried to protect us, but hiding it doesn't always save anyone. I used to think that my father's silence was betrayal. That the past he kept from us was a wound meant to harm. But now I know it was love. Imperfect, flawed love. Fearful, but still love. And that's the lesson I carry: truth is not just about what is hidden. It's about what we do once it's revealed. how we face it, how we share it, how we forgive. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Michael will stay in our lives, or if other stories from the orphanage will surface. But I do know this: carrying the truth openly makes us stronger, and it gives those who came before us a voice they never had. So I leave you with this thought: sometimes, uncovering the past can break you, but it can also heal you. Sometimes, the hardest truths are the ones that lead to the most peace. Would you have faced the secrets of your family if you were in my place? How far would you go to uncover a truth that could change everything you thought you knew? If this story touched you, or reminded you of your own family's hidden chapters, please consider subscribing to our channel. There's power in listening, in learning, and in sharing these stories together. And remember, sometimes even the smallest, most forgotten places carry the biggest truths.